right, everybody, we are officially into the year of 2023. We're in the new year. We're midway through February, and I've just got one question for you. How are the New Year's resolutions doing? Right, that gym membership you got, you said you'd be going to the gym all the time, the books you said you would read, the diet you said you would be on. How's it going for you? Listen, I'm being facetious, but understand, I do get that New Year's resolutions can be hard. Why? Because starting new habits are difficult things. Having new rhythms is a difficult thing. And what I want to consider as we think about rhythms, and you hear this phrase tossed around all the time, you'll never become what you do occasionally, right? It's the idea about rhythms, like rhythms happen and habits happen based off of things you do every single day, and that is really what informs what you become. But I also want to throw it this way, that what you don't do also informs what you become as well. And so as I consider as a Christian, as I read the Bible, I understand that, okay, rhythms isn't just like a New Year's resolution thing. It's not just a cultural thing, right? There are commands in the Bible from God to his people to establish rhythms in their lives. And we see a great example that we go to all the time is in Exodus 20 with the 10 commandments. God gives the people of Israel, his people, commandments. And he says, hey, this is the way you ought to live. These are your rhythms for life. And one of the classic rhythms for that, or one of the classic rhythms in the 10 commandments that we see all the time is the command to keep the Sabbath day holy. It's the command for the Sabbath day. It's the idea that you work 6 days and you take one day, you set it apart and you make it holy. You focus on God. You don't work. That's specifically the command. And so you hear a command like that, and what you have a tendency to think is like, okay, well, I've got to make sure that I establish my rhythms every single week, right? If you're a Christian, you're like, okay, I go to church on Sundays. That's how we worship. That's how we establish our Sabbath. But let's be honest, maybe there might be some of you out there that your New Year's resolution was to get to church every single Sunday, and you haven't even gotten to that point yet. And you're struggling with that. You see, even keeping a day of rest is oftentimes a struggle for us, especially in our culture. And I want to paint for you maybe a new picture as you think about what the Sabbath is and why that command is there. If it's something that's discouraged you, if it's something that's worried you as you struggle to get in this rhythm of Sabbath and worshiping every single Sunday, is I want to paint for you a picture of what you might be missing in the command to keep the Sabbath day holy. You see, believe it or not, what Jesus was, especially if you read the Gospels, you'll catch this, what Jesus was oftentimes accused of by the religious leaders of his day, and oftentimes the reason so many people and so many religious leaders wanted to kill him was specifically because he didn't do what? He didn't keep the Sabbath. You see, he was actually accused of breaking God's rhythm for his people. And so in so many interactions, they would see him specifically, like they would call him out and they would say, well, you healed someone on the Sabbath, or you and your disciples are working on the Sabbath as you serve and as you're specifically healing people. And they would accuse him of that and say, for that reason, you're blaspheming, right? So understand this, that Jesus was actually accused of breaking this law as he was healing people on the Sabbath. In John 17, we see this is right after Jesus has just healed a man. And he's then accused by the religious leaders of his day, saying, hey, you healed someone on the Sabbath, you broke Moses' law. And this is what Jesus said. Jesus responds to them in verse 17. This is John chapter 5, verse 17. He says this, Jesus responded to them, my Father is still working, and I am working also. And this is why the Jews began trying all the more to kill him. It was not only that he was breaking the Sabbath, but that he was calling God his own Father, making himself equal to God. You see, what you don't read here is you're not reading Jesus saying, oh, hey, you know, I get a pass from having to follow Moses' law. No, you don't understand. Jesus is not trying to get a pass for all of humanity today. We don't need to follow that law anymore. What he's trying to say is it's actually a revelation about who he is, and he's actually revealing what the purpose of the Sabbath actually is. You see, when Jesus is drawing the parallel between him being the Son of God and he's saying, my Father is working and so am I, what he's trying to say is, no, you don't understand. The purpose of the Sabbath, the purpose of you as humanity, as a man working 6 days and then resting on the seventh day, is so that you remember that on the seventh day, despite all you've toiled for, despite what you've worked for in your career, you see, what keeping the Sabbath reminds us of is that despite what you can produce for yourself, despite what a great career may give you, despite what a great family may produce for you and the happiness that can make for you, despite all of what you can do for yourself in 6 days worth of work, there is a day dedicated, a rhythm of you remembering that alone you cannot provide for all your own needs, and that ultimately it's a focus of reorienting my life around ultimately at the end of the day, despite all that I can produce for myself, I need God to produce something eternal in me. You see, this is what the Pharisees and the Sadducees, the religious leaders of Jesus' day, were missing about the Sabbath, is they thought, no, the Sabbath is just an opportunity for me to show how holy I am. It was an opportunity for them to produce and show, this is actually my holiness as it's playing out. It was just like any of the other 6 days a week as they tried to show off, like, hey, I look how well I can keep the law. They were trying to produce something for themselves. And Jesus is trying to say, no, you don't understand. What you're witnessing me doing that's exactly what you're supposed to be focusing on the Sabbath, is remembering that even when you are not working, God is working. And it is ultimately that work that you need in your life. And so, then as you consider, even in your own life, trying to establish rhythms and healthy things in your life, understand that God, from day one, literally from the day of creation, said, I've created the world in 6 days and I rested on the seventh. Why? Look at what Mark chapter 2, verse 27 says. Not because I want you to live this way just because I said so, but look what he says. Jesus says, then he told them the Sabbath was made for man and not man for the Sabbath. Meaning the rhythm of Sabbath rest was not, you were not made to follow this rule. This rule was made so that you could live in the right relationship with God that you were intended to. And so maybe instead that's a way that we can reframe the law even in your own head. Recognize this, that by the time Israel actually received the 10 Commandments at Sinai, they had already been saved, which means the purpose of the law is not that you would figure out how to earn your way to salvation or a right standing with God, but rather it's God showing his people, no, this is what it means to live as a whole and complete person who are also my people. You see, he was establishing a rhythm and a way of living that said that this is actually how you were always intended to live. And so as you're considering healthy rhythms, guys, even in my own life, and church rhythms and going to church has been a part of my life for a long time. And I'll even say this, even from my own life, as I consider my rhythms of going to church, one thing that I've learned about, even recently in life, in my 20s, is as I consider the rhythms of Sabbath and the rhythms of Sabbath rest, is that, my personal struggle and my personal sin is this: my thought life can get out of control at times. And what I recognize as positive about the Sabbath rhythm is not just that, well, I'm doing what God commanded me to do so I can feel good about the other things in my life, is that no. At the root of me, I have a tendency to be anxious and worried about things in my life that are outside of my control. And the Sabbath rhythm teaches me on a week-to-week basis to gather together with God's people in God's house and say, you know what? There's only so much I can control in this life, and God, you've got to have the rest, right? And it's teaching me on a week-to-week basis to remember that there are things in my life that are just a God-like scope that I cannot handle myself. And so just as I consider rhythms, as I consider the command to keep the Sabbath, I recognize that this is not a command for me to earn or to display holiness to people, but it is actually a betterment for my own life and just a part of that process of God making me who he has called me to be. My name is Zach Rozansky. Thanks for listening to my short sermon.
Hi, I'm Pastor Matt Brown. Thank you so much for watching this content. The reason that we produce this content is to help you build an authentic relationship with God, with yourself, and ultimately with others, people just like you who are furthering their relationship with God. If you would like to transition from someone who just watches this content to partner with us so that we could produce that content, I would really like to invite you to go to donate.sc. This is the best way for you to become a part of what God is doing at Sandals Church to share this message of authenticity all across the globe. Thank you so much for your time, and I appreciate your generosity.